Merry met, virtual traveller, and welcome to Stories from Lore, a podcast that invites you to rewild yourself through story by exploring nature, folklore, and the stories it inspires. My name is Dawn Nelson, and I'm an author, consultant, and professional storyteller. In episode 6, we are looking at the fearsome, many-headed beasts that have appeared in mythology and story throughout the centuries. My main references for this episode are Borges' Book of Imaginary Beings, Richard Barber's translation of the MS Bodley's 764 Bestiary, and Hana Videen's The Deorhord. So, grab yourself a cuppa as we battle with the many-headed. Let's start with possibly one of the most famous many-headed beings, the Chimera. I told the story of Bellerophon and Chimera from the Greek myths in Season 3, Episode 2. Homer is the first to mention this beast in his Iliad. It has the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a snake. It does have a propensity for flame-throwing via its lion's head. Yes, as the name of this episode suggests, it has 3 heads: a lion's, a goat's, and the serpent's. So the lion and the goat's head sit side by side at the front, and the serpent's head is at the end of its tail. Bellerophon defeated this monstrous being with the help of a wise man and Pegasus. I shan't spoil it for you, because you can listen to the story in the archives, and I've put a link for that in the show notes. The Chimera from Greek myth is often considered to be the one and only Chimera. However, over time in popular mythology and lore, the Chimera has become synonymous with any kind of mixed species being. The most recent source I found is Ben Aronovich, who uses this definition in his second book in the Rivers of London series, Moon Over Soho. In this book, there is an evil magician who is basically creating chimeras out of people and animals. If you look back into medieval literature, though, there are a few more many-headed beasts mentioned. Hana Videen talks of a beast that is mentioned in the Tiberius manuscript and the Noel Codex. These are 2 of the 4 surviving medieval manuscripts that we rely on for most of our sources of Old English and what was going on during the medieval period. This beast is called the lubestru. This is a beast that will self-combust if pushed too far. I know that feeling. Or it will cause you to self-combust if you touch it. It is described as having 2 heads, 8 feet, and the eyes of a Valkyrie. The Valkyrie is a being from the Germanic and Scandinavian mythologies that sweeps across the battlefields collecting the dead. Don't worry though, these beings are said to reside in an area called Lentibelsinia, an unknown country that's possibly Middle Eastern. And even if you do happen to stumble across it, it will flee at the sound of a human voice, so just make sure you're being noisy. Creatures such as these, found in the surviving medieval manuscripts, were called Unyafreyalekan, which means unheard of or unknown, unusual. And I love that the Old English holds these words that have such specific meanings. Next up is a chimera of sorts, known as the Bonnacon. It is described in the bestiaries as having a bull's head and body, but the mane of a horse. It has horns that point backwards, and as it's running away from its predators, it produces burning excrement that singes the grass and produces a foul smell. The dung was described as being poisonous and will keep anyone away. This description is definitely reminiscent of the wildebeest, although its dung is not fiery, but it probably is quite smelly. I did try to Google this, yes, the lengths I go to for this podcast, but, well, I couldn't find much about wildebeest dung, funnily enough. Apparently, though, lion dung absolutely reeks, so perhaps the lion chasing the wildebeest was the actual culprit for the stench. The next multi-species beast is a lukrota, said to live in India. According to the bestiaries, it's as big as a donkey, has the back end of a stag and the middle of a lion, the head of a horse and the hooves of a pig. It has an enormous mouth that stretches from ear to ear, and it can imitate the human voice. I have no idea what the scribes were describing, but I really don't want to meet it. And on the subject of beasts I'd rather not meet, we have the Manticore. Again, appearing in the bestiaries, this is described as having 3 rows of teeth, the head of a human, a lion's body, and a tail that can sting. It's described as being the colour of blood, and it enjoys a good feast of human flesh. Oh joy! Slightly less terrifying is the paranda, a beast thought to hail from Ethiopia, and it's as big as an ox, leaves tracks like an ibis, has the horns and head of a stag, and the coat of a bear. If it is disturbed, it will shapeshift into whatever is closest to it. Perhaps this is a long-lost hairy chameleon. The rhinoceros is described as having one head. However, the creature is made up of 3 animals: the body of a horse, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a stag, and a magnificent horn in the middle of its forehead. The bestiary states it is never taken into the power of human beings while it lives. It can be killed, but never captured. On the subject of single-horned, possibly mythical beasts, the unicorn, whilst not a chimera in the traditional sense, is perhaps someone's early interpretation of a rhinoceros. Or perhaps they were confusing it with this monoceros. It's certainly an unyafrayali Khan. It is described in the bestiaries as being extremely fast, and no hunter can hope to catch it, and this is certainly the case in most of the stories you will read about it. If you want to catch it, an elaborate plot must be carried out. A maiden of the virgin variety must be led to the middle of the forest and left there. The unicorn will, at some point, hopefully before the poor girl has starved or fallen prey to wolves, stumble upon her and leap into her lap, where it will promptly go to sleep, allowing the hunters to kill it. I don't know about you, but that brings a whole new light on my daughter's early obsession with unicorns, something that is fairly prevalent in the Key Stage 1 crowd. For those of you not in the UK, KS1 is 5 to 7-year-olds. But what am I saying? I still love a unicorn, and I must be about KS30 by now, if such a thing exists, although I'm not sure it does. Anyway, all of this rambling brings us to the story for this episode, and it is a story that I wrote for my book of seasonal stories, Adventures in Nature. Back in 2017, I challenged myself to write 100 stories in 100 days, and, well, I'm pleased to say I succeeded. 48 of these stories then became the basis for the book, and so it was that 52 didn't quite make the cut, and The Last Unicorn was one of those 52. So I'm sharing it with you for this episode. Once upon a time, there was an all-powerful king who loved to hunt. He was a collector of trophies, and he displayed all the animals he'd hunted in his grand hall. Many of his subjects did not like this, and they believed he did not respect the forest and that he would bring down the wrath of the little folk, but the king was arrogant. He did not care. In this king's kingdom, there lived the last unicorn. The king had searched for this unicorn for many, many years. The unicorn's horn would be the ultimate trophy, and he had saved a space in his collection for the animal once he had found it. He had no concern that this unicorn was the last unicorn in the world. No concern that once this beautiful creature of the forest was slain, well, there would be no more. His only worry was the gap in his collection. The little folk of the forest knew that the day would come when the king would find the unicorn and slay it. They needed to find a way to protect it. The unicorn was fast and always ran hard to get away from the king's hunting parties. She always succeeded, but one day she knew she would not. The unicorn was resigned to her fate, for after all she could not control it. She made the most of each day, and in the evenings she would join the little people for dancing and celebrations in the moonlit glades of the forest. The day did come when the king was out searching for the unicorn once more. The little folk heard the dogs of the hunting party, but the unicorn was tired of running. She lay down under a tree, and she fell into a deep sleep. She heard nothing of the hunt. The king could not believe his luck when he saw the unicorn under the willow fast asleep. He raised his bow and aimed. It was no sport, but he did not care. As he went to fire the arrow, the unicorn dissolved in front of him, and in its place was a pure white dove which flew up into the canopy far away from the reach of the king and his huntsmen. The little folk of the forest had done what they could for the unicorn by changing her into a dove. Now she could fly free, and the king would have no way of knowing amongst all the other doves in his kingdom which one was the unicorn. But the little folk didn't stop there. When the king arrived back at his castle, angry and frustrated and cursing the little folk, he found the grand hall full of animals. Not the stuffed animals he had left behind, oh no. Animals that were alive. The fox from the fields, the owls from the trees, the wolf from the highlands, the bear from America, and the lion from Africa, the caiman from the Amazon. There was a cacophony of noise, snarling, squawking, growling, howling, as they awoke from their slumber. As he opened the large oak doors of the grand hall, the animals turned to look. The king was never seen again. However, thanks to the little folk of the forest, the next time you see a dove, it might just be the last unicorn. Thanks for joining me around the hearth for this episode of Stories from Lore. This is the penultimate episode for this season and, in fact, the penultimate episode for the podcast, as I've decided to stop at 5 seasons so that I can concentrate on the book deadlines that I have this year and create some space to develop new ideas. So don't worry, I have plenty of those, and I will no doubt be back next year with a new podcast that explores heritage landscape and stories in new ways. In the meantime, for more folklore and stories, you can subscribe to my Substack newsletter. You just hop over to the Substack site and search for Ceridwen's Cauldron, or use the link in the show notes. And you can upgrade for just £5 a month to access some extended episodes in the archives, extras for previous seasons, and an exclusive monthly podcast for subscribers called The Story Forecast. Signing up as a paid or free subscriber is very much appreciated and helps to support the podcast and my work with folklore and story. As well as Substack, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook as The Bard Dawn. Reviews are also gratefully received. I hope to see you again soon, as I'd love to tell you another story. Until next time, toodle pip.